Welcome to the deep dive. Local government often just hums along in the background, right? But it actually shapes so much of our daily lives. Today, we're digging into one specific city, Menifee, California, as a sort of case study. It's growing incredibly fast, but also seems to be facing some pretty public hurdles. So what we're going to do is take all these sources we've gathered, news reports, research, even raw public data, and really try to pull out what matters, cut through the noise, help you understand the big picture in Menifee.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a simple picture. There are layers here. We'll be looking at how things connect leadership changes, projects that seem stuck, some controversy around city money. It's all linked. Our aim is to give you that clear, nuanced view of what's actually happening behind the scenes at City Hall.
Okay, let's jump right in. There was some pretty immediate news that caught my eye, the termination of two key department heads, Cheryl Kitzero and Ron Puccinelli.
That's right. And these weren't minor roles. Kitzero was the community development director, handling things like city planning, building permits, housing stuff. She'd been there since 2018.
Okay, pretty central.
Very. And Ron Puccinelli, he was actually Menifee's first IT director, started in March 2021, built their whole computer network, launched Menifee TV, basically built the IT department from the ground up.
So yeah, significant people leaving.
Exactly, vital roles.
And the thing is, our sources show this isn't isolated. These two leaving makes it, 5 department heads gone in just the past year?
That's the number, yeah, 5. You had Gina Gonzalez from Economic Development resign back in March 24.
Right.
Then Michelle Clayton, the assistant city manager, she resigned in April 24. And Jonathan Nix, community services director, he left in August 24.
Wow. I mean, that level of turnover at the top,
Mm-hmm.
that has to send ripples through the organization, right? It's not just names changing.
Absolutely. It raises serious questions about stability. And it's not just resignations either. There's this pattern of administrative leave.
Right. Tell us about that.
Well, Kitzero, the one just terminated, she was placed on leave first. Same with Rochelle Clayton before she resigned. And even the city manager himself, Armando Villa.
The city manager was on leave.
Yeah, for almost 4 months, actually, from October 2023 to February 2024. And the key thing is there was no public explanation given for these leaves.
So people just left guessing.
Exactly. It fuels speculation, Talk about mismanagement, instability. It's not great for public confidence when things happen behind closed doors like that. Clayton, for instance, she moved on to San Bernardino, then Barstow after her leave.
So let's talk about the city manager, Armando Villa. He's been there since late 2017.
December 2017, yeah.
And what's really striking is apparently since he arrived, every single department has seen its director change.
That's what the sources suggest, a complete turnover at the director level during his tenure.
Yet the city council gave him a contract extension through 2029 and a pretty hefty salary, over $320,000 base.
$322,358 to be precise, yeah.
So how do you square that? Constant churn underneath, but long-term stability seemingly endorsed at the very top. What does that signal?
It's puzzling, isn't it? On one hand, maybe the council values his leadership for the long haul, but the high turnover below him could suggest, maybe a difficult internal environment, or perhaps constant strategic shifts that lead to people leaving.
Or trouble retaining people.
Could be. It definitely raises questions about, how effectively the city can manage its rapid growth with that much change happening just below the top spot. It's something residents probably notice.
Okay, so leadership's definitely a complex area here, but let's shift gears a bit. Often, it's the money stuff, the ethics, that really gets public attention.
Always does. Financial integrity is huge for trust.
Let's talk about former Mayor Scott Mann. There was that big FPPC fine back in 2016.
Right. The Fair Political Practices Commission, that was a major story.
$60,000.
Yeah.
That's a significant fine. And it was for misusing campaign funds, right? Almost $45,000.
Yeah. $44,894 over several years from 2009 to 2014. The FPPC found he used campaign money for personal things.
Like what?
Things like expenses for a family wedding, his car registration, lots of meals out, 147 separate occasions, the report said.
Wow. Now, he did pay it back, right? And paid the fine personally.
He did. Reimbursed the campaign and paid the $60K fine from his own pocket. But the damage was done. It definitely played a role in him losing the next election and resigning. It's a stark reminder about those boundaries.
And wasn't there another council member around that time, Lisa Sobek?
Yes, she also had FPPC violations reported in 2016. No fine in her case, and the details weren't really made public, so likely less severe. But it added to that general climate of scrutiny around ethics back then.
Okay, now here's something I found really interesting and kind of confusing at first. There were these claims floating around about a super long FPPC investigation.
Yes, the 39-month investigation.
Right, that it was mysteriously dropped. Some sources even said there was no evidence of such an investigation ever happening. It sounded, well, a bit cloak and dagger.
It did sound murky, and this is exactly why you have to dig into the actual data, not just rely on hearsay or summary reports.
So what did the real data show?
We looked it up on the FPPC's own complaint and case information portal. And sure enough, there was a case. Case number 2020-000792. It was opened September 24th, 2020, and it was closed December 29, 2023, if you do the math.
That's 39 months, exactly.
Precisely. And the subject was listed as mass mailings at public expense in menifee. So an investigation definitely happened, and it lasted that long.
But was it mysteriously dropped? What was the outcome?
That's the key part. The official disposition listed as no violations found.
So not dropped mysteriously. It concluded
Yeah.
and found nothing wrong.
Exactly. So the data completely clears it up. Investigation happened, took 39 months, concluded with no violations found. It shows how important it is to check those primary sources to get the real story, rather than relying on rumors or incomplete info.
That's a fantastic example of the deep dive approach. Okay, let's pivot now to something very visible to residents, development projects.
Yeah.
Or maybe stalled development projects.
Yes, these can be major sources of frustration.
First one that comes to mind is the Krikorian Theater. What was the original plan there?
Oh, it was supposed to be this big, flashy entertainment complex, bowling, movie theaters, restaurants, a real destination for menifee. The developer apparently put in over $20 million.
But it never finished.
Nope. Construction stopped dead in April 2020. The pandemic was cited as the main reason.
And since then.
Sad.
Half-finished buildings became a real eyesore,
Yeah.
a constant reminder of what didn't happen.
I can imagine. So what's the latest? Well, the city declared it a public nuisance back in June 2024. And just recently, September 2024, a judge actually approved its demolition.
Demolition. So it's really over.
Seems that way. It's become this symbol of, well, broken promises and frustration for a lot of people who are looking forward to it. A very visible symbol.
And that's not the only development causing concern, is it? What about the Cherry Hills Golf Course?
Right, that's another big one, especially for the Sun City part of Menifee. That course had been there forever, since 1969.
A real fixture.
Absolutely. But it was sold in January 2024 to a developer, Ambient Communities, and then it closed down.
And people weren't happy.
No. There was immediate concern, voiced loudly at city council meetings. People are worried it'll be turned into more houses or commercial buildings. They're vowing to fight any zoning changes.
It's that fear of losing recreational space, isn't it? Losing part of the community's character.
Exactly. It taps into those anxieties about rapid growth changing the feel of the place they've known for decades.
There was also something about a park project. Central Park.
The Central Park Amphitheater shade cover. Yeah, that's another one. It's a $7 million project approved back in December 2023.
But it's run into problems.
It seems so. There have been delays, and then these allegations started surfacing in public comments about an irregular bidding process. People were calling it fishy.
Any proof of irregularities?
Not that we could find detailed in our sources, but like we talked about with the administrative leaves, the perception of something being wrong combined with delays.
It just adds to that feeling that maybe things aren't being managed well.
Precisely. Even without hard evidence widely available, the rumors and the delays themselves can really erode public trust. It feeds into a narrative.
Which brings us to another area where trust is crucial. Public money. Let's talk about Measure DD.
Okay, yeah. Measure DD. That was the 1% sales tax increase.
Passed back in 2016 by a pretty wide margin, right? 68%?
Yeah, voters approved it. And the pitch was all about funding public safety police, fire, and fixing infrastructure, things people generally support.
But it became controversial later. There was an effort to repeal it.
There was. Measure M in 2020 tried to repeal Measure DD. It failed, but the campaign highlighted the core criticism.
Which was?
Opponents argued that the way Measure DD was sold was misleading. They felt it was heavily pushed as only for police and fire.
when really it went into the general fund.
Exactly, which means the city could use it for police and fire, but also for basically anything else the general fund covers. The opponents called the original campaign propaganda.
I see. So it felt like a bit of a bait and switch to some people.
That was the feeling, yes. It created distrust because the promise felt very specific, but the reality was broader. Even though the repeal failed, and there's a citizen committee overseeing the funds now, that initial controversy definitely left a mark on how people view the city's handling of tax money.
So if we pull all these threads together, the leadership turnover, the questions around transparency, the ethical issues like the Mann case, the stalled projects like Krikorian, and this debate over Measure DD, what's the big picture here for menifee?
I think the big picture is one of a city dealing with intense growing pains and struggling with transparency and consistency in the process. All of these things we've discussed, leadership churn, project delays, funding debates, they aren't isolated incidents.
They connect.
They absolutely connect. They weave together to create this overall narrative about governance in Menifee right now, and they really highlight how crucial openness and accountability are, especially when a community is changing so fast. Public trust seems quite fragile.
It really does. So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. When you see this kind of pattern, the leadership shifts, the development challenges, the funding arguments in a rapidly growing city like Menifee, what does it tell you about the sheer difficulty of managing that kind of expansion? And maybe more importantly, what level of transparency, what level of openness do you think is truly essential for people to have confidence in their local government? Something to think about.